Southern Iraq, February 26, 1991. Just before dawn. The flat desert stretches endlessly toward the horizon. Sand and smoke hang in the air. Through thermal sights, the world glows in sharp contrast. White heat against black earth. A platoon of M1 Abrams tanks, call sign Ghost 66, idles in formation atop a ridgeline. Their commanders receive the order. Engage a column of Republican Guard armor pushing west. Soviet-built T-72s, fresh from concealment. The range is 3,500 meters. In the Soviet doctrine books, this is impossible. No tank engagement is supposed to start beyond 2,000 meters. No gun should have a first-round hit probability past 2,500. And the T-72's fire control system? It barely functions at night. But this isn't theory. This is the Gulf War. The Abrams crews confirm the range. Fire control locks in. Commander shouts, "Target, T-72, front, fire!" The 120mm smoothbore gun barks once. A glowing streak of depleted uranium pierces the darkness. 1 second later, the lead T-72 explodes. Turret blown completely off, hurled 10 meters into the air. The other tanks try to scatter, but the battlefield belongs to the Americans now. One by one, Iraqi armor is destroyed. The M1s fire on the move, in dust, through fog, using thermal sights the Soviets never believed could work in real combat. At no point does the Iraqi column return effective fire. They can't see. They can't range. They can't survive. In under 4 minutes, the battlefield is quiet. Dozens of Soviet-made tanks lie burning. Not a single Abrams is damaged. 300 kilometers away in Baghdad, intercepts from Republican Guard comms cause panic. The Soviets, monitoring the battle from their own forward intelligence stations, are stunned. Back in Moscow, High Command watches grainy satellite footage and tank-on-tank telemetry with rising horror. The tank they had once called a mobile furnace has just eviscerated their entire armored export strategy. The M1 Abrams wasn't just winning, it was untouchable. For years, they'd mocked the design. Too complex, too fragile, too reliant on Western logistics. They believed their tanks, hardened and proven in Afghanistan and Chechnya, could take any NATO armor toe-to-toe. But now, they're watching a weapon system that doesn't obey those rules. It doesn't slug it out at 500 meters, it kills at 3 kilometers, and it doesn't miss. The Soviets built tanks to overwhelm by numbers. The Americans built a tank that doesn't care how many you bring. This was never supposed to happen. But now the ground truth is undeniable. The Abrams had entered the battlefield and rewritten everything. Moscow, 1979, a secure conference room deep within the Ministry of Defense. A panel of Soviet armored warfare specialists gathers to review intelligence on America's next-generation main battle tank. The XM-1, soon to be known as the M1 Abrams. The CIA leaks had been deliberate. The Americans wanted the two Soviets to know a new tank was coming. The Soviets weren't impressed. General Vasily Shevchenko, a veteran of the Warsaw Pact's armored divisions, flips through the dossier and smirks. Too many electronics, too much reliance on unproven technology. A turbine engine? He shakes his head. This is not a tank. It's a power plant with tracks. Others nod. The XM-1's gas turbine engine is seen as a critical weakness. Compared to the rugged diesel-powered T-72, it's considered fragile, fuel-hungry, and unsuited for extended operations. Another general chimes in. This is typical American thinking. Over-engineer, overspend, overkill. The belief is firm. A real tank should be cheap, easy to repair, and capable of being fielded in massive numbers. That's what the T-72 offers. A low profile, a 125mm smoothbore gun, auto-loading, enough armor to survive a NATO hit, on paper. The Abrams, by contrast, looks bloated. The Soviets examine its Chobham composite armor. They assume it's good, but probably only from the front. They read about depleted uranium rounds but dismiss them as propaganda. They assume American armor tactics are built around defense, not offense. And the Americans themselves seem to confirm it. Initial M1 tanks are fielded without a proper high-velocity gun. The 105mm M68 cannon is viewed as insufficient against newer Soviet tanks. To the Soviet analysts, the Abrams is a peacetime tank, something designed for the Pentagon's budget politics, not for the gritty, chaotic battlefield of Eastern Europe. They imagine the M1 bogging down in forests, breaking down in the cold, running out of fuel within hours. They envision entire divisions stranded while their high-maintenance turbines beg for aviation fuel, so they plan accordingly. They double down on what works: the T-72, the T-80, and mass production doctrine. Cheap, fast, mobile, kill in numbers, replace in bulk. In their minds, the next war would be over before the Abrams ever showed up. But this room is filled with men looking at blueprints, not realities. No one has seen what the Abrams can do at 3,000 meters. No one has witnessed thermal sighting systems acquire targets through smoke and sand. No one has faced a gun stabilized well enough to fire accurately on the move, across uneven terrain. They don't see a threat. They see a Western indulgence, a boutique tank for limited wars, not the future. In this room of wrong assumptions, they believe the Abrams can't outperform Soviet armor. They're not just wrong. They're catastrophically wrong. Because the war is coming. And it won't be about how fast you move. It'll be about how fast you die. For decades, the Soviet Union's armored warfare doctrine was a triumph of numbers and momentum. Its foundation? Shock, mass, and speed. Warsaw Pact strategy didn't hinge on building the best tank. It hinged on building enough tanks and using them in overwhelming waves. The T-55, T-62, T-72, and eventually T-80 were all designed with one goal: reach Western Europe before NATO could react. Their doctrine dictated forward defense with immediate counteroffensive, massed armored breakthroughs, even at high casualty rates, short, sharp engagements, often under 2,000 meters, reliance on autoloaders and simplified electronics for faster, cheaper production, mobility and tactical flexibility, not long-range precision. And it had worked. In 1978, during the invasion of Czechoslovakia, Soviet tanks flooded across borders with clockwork precision. In Afghanistan, Soviet armor held strategic points with minimal Western interference. For every one NATO tank, the Soviets could field 5, 10 even. That was the formula. Fast, numerous, disposable. In contrast, American and NATO armor had long emphasized survivability and precision firepower, a doctrine that had yet to be tested at scale. In Soviet war games, this approach was laughed off. The thinking went, if you need 60 tons of armor and a gas turbine engine to win a fight, you've already lost it. And then came the M1 Abrams, the one vehicle that refused to fit inside any Soviet playbook. It had better armor. It had a faster turret traverse. It had crew-first survivability, with blowout panels and separated ammunition storage. It could drive cross-country at 45 km/h, stop, fire, and hit a target on the first shot from miles away. But most dangerously, it had sight. Thermal imaging systems let Abrams crews see through dust, smoke, and darkness. While Soviet tanks relied on infrared spotlights and primitive night optics, the Abrams hunted in total concealment. It was designed to fire first, from farther, and never be seen. This single capability, thermal overmatch, broke the Soviet doctrine before a shot was fired. Because all those waves of T-72s, they weren't just outgunned, they were blind. Worse yet, the Abrams wasn't fighting alone. NATO doctrine integrated air superiority, attack helicopters, artillery fire, and GPS-targeted maneuvers with tank movements. The battlefield was no longer just steel versus steel. It was a kill network. and Abrams was at the center of it. So while Soviet generals dreamed of mass assaults and river crossings, the U.S. was building something else. A tank that wouldn't have to slug it out with 10 enemies, because it would kill all 10 before they got into range. The old doctrine said, survive the first shot, return fire, advance. The new reality? There is no first shot, only the last one, and it belongs to the Abrams. January 17th, 1991. The Gulf War begins. At 2:38 a.m., the first Abrams tanks of the U.S. 1st Armored Division cross into Iraqi territory. The battlefield is pitch black. Wind kicks up fine desert sand, turning the air to fog. For most armies, this would halt all movement. For the Abrams, it's the perfect hunting ground. Iraqi armored forces, many of them equipped with Soviet-built T-72 M1 tanks, hold strong, defensive lines across southern Iraq and Kuwait. They're dug in, supported by artillery, and reinforced by units modeled directly on Soviet armored doctrine. But there's one fatal problem. They can't see what's coming. U.S. tank crews operate with thermal sights, a capability the Soviets believed too expensive and too fragile to be reliable. Now it's changing everything. At 3:12 a.m., an Abrams platoon detects a stationary formation of Iraqi T-72s over 3,200 meters away. That's nearly double the effective range of the Iraqi tanks. The T-72s are unaware they've been spotted. The Abrams commander gives the order. First tank fires, direct hit, turret kill. Second tank fires, hit, mobility kill. Third tank engages, hit. Ammo detonation, a fireball lights up the night. The T-72 crews panic, turning their turrets blindly, unsure if they're under attack. By the time they attempt to return fire, it's too late. The Abrams are already on the move, relocating and engaging the next position. One Iraqi battalion, over 40 armored vehicles, is neutralized before dawn. Only 2 American tanks are hit, both by RPGs, and neither is knocked out. It's the first impossible event. A single American tank company obliterates a Soviet-equipped battalion without suffering a single loss. Soviet-made armor was supposed to be battle-hardened. The T-72 was the pride of the Warsaw Pact. But in the desert of Iraq, its gun can't reach far enough. Its sights can't see through heat or dust. And its armor folds like paper against depleted uranium shells, traveling at 1.5 kilometers per second. The engagement defies every expectation Moscow had about tank warfare. The range? Impossible. The speed? Inhuman. The precision? Machine-like. GRU observers embedded with Iraqi Republican Guard units send encrypted updates back to Moscow. Abrams firing first. Lethal beyond known range. Iraqi tanks unable to respond. Request urgent reevaluation of M1A1 capabilities. But the reevaluation comes too late. Across the front, similar reports pour in. By the end of Day 3, U.S. forces have destroyed over 400 Iraqi tanks, most without suffering a single vehicle loss in return. T-72s, T-62s, T-55s. All swept from the field like static targets on a range. This wasn't just a battle. It was a warning. The West hadn't just built a tank. They had built a scalpel for armored warfare, and now it was cutting Soviet legacy doctrine to pieces. In the weeks following the first reports from Iraq, tension in Soviet command circles reaches a boiling point. Inside a secured facility outside Moscow, senior Armored Corps officers and GRU analysts gather to analyze satellite imagery, intercepted transmissions, and limited combat telemetry. Across the room, disbelief radiates from the faces of generals trained on the invincibility of Soviet steel. The reports are devastating. Abrams tanks engaging at 3,000+ meters, T-72 formations neutralized before first return fire. 0. Confirmed kills on Abrams by Iraqi armored units. At first, the response is instinctive. Denial. These are exaggerations, mutters General Novikov, a veteran of the T-72 program. Propaganda, Western disinformation to humiliate us. The Ministry of Defense quietly circulates its own sanitized narrative. The Iraqis were poorly trained. The terrain favored the Americans. Soviet equipment was not used properly. These excuses gain traction, temporarily. But the evidence refuses to be ignored. Footage from U.S. aerial drones and gun cams leaks into Western media. T-72s erupting in plumes of fire, their turrets tossed skyward, their crews never escaping. Thermal imaging captures the impossible. American tanks firing with perfect accuracy through haze, smoke, and darkness. The Iraqi excuse begins to crumble. Because the Republican Guard, the unit taking the heaviest losses, was trained directly by Soviet advisors. It had the best T-72s available, M1 variants, upgraded for export. It used Soviet tactics, operated on Soviet doctrine, and executed under Soviet expectations. And yet, they were being annihilated. One GRU colonel returns from Baghdad with a chilling observation. Their tanks were dead before they knew they were in battle. Still, the leadership in Moscow can't fully process the scale of the failure. They fall back on survivability theory. The Abrams must be more vulnerable than it appears. Its gas turbine engine must be a logistical liability. Its armor must crack under sustained fire. Yet reports from captured Iraqi officers say otherwise. Abrams tanks moved at night without headlights. We could not see them. We only knew they were there after our tanks exploded. The armor? Untouched by the 125mm shells fired by T-72s. The logistics? Maintained by mobile fuelers, fast repair units, and GPS-guided movements. The vulnerabilities? Overestimated and irrelevant in real combat. What the Soviets can't admit, what they won't say out loud, is this. They've been preparing for the wrong war, training for the wrong enemy, building the wrong tanks. And now, in the burning desert of Iraq, the truth is rolling across the sand. Protected by armor they don't understand, firing shells they can't stop, operating with autonomy they never prepared for. The Americans haven't just taken the high ground, they've redefined it. Cornered by evidence and unable to dispute battlefield outcomes, Soviet commanders pivot to a new rationalization. If the M1 Abrams is outperforming expectations, it's only because the battlefield favored it. This becomes the prevailing theory. It could never work in Europe. They point to bridges the Abrams might not cross, forests it might not maneuver through, and cold winters that could freeze its turbine engine. They argue the tank is too heavy, too wide, and too fuel-hungry to survive a real war in Eastern Europe. The logistics argument becomes their shield. General Vasilyev, chief of logistics doctrine, presents the party line. It consumes aviation fuel. It will outrun its supply lines. It is a sprinting beast with no endurance. They imagine the Abrams stuck in the mud, fuel-starved, abandoned, vulnerable to counterattack. This theory becomes comforting. It restores a sense of control. But in the field, the story is very different. Because the Abrams wasn't designed to fight alone. It moved with supply convoys equipped to refuel turbine engines. It coordinated with air superiority, GPS navigation, and rapid logistics hubs. And most importantly, it didn't need to hold ground. It just needed to destroy enemy tanks faster than they could shoot back. And that's exactly what it did. While Soviet theorists argued about fuel efficiency, U.S. tankers were crossing hundreds of kilometers of desert at full speed, maneuvering faster than any heavy armor platform in history. The Abrams didn't bog down. It didn't burn out. It didn't stall. It kept going. Its turbine engine, once mocked, proved remarkably resilient in sandy environments, less susceptible to dust clogging than diesel competitors. It gave the tank instant throttle response, allowing it to accelerate faster, pivot quicker, and chase down fleeing targets. And in terms of weight? Yes, the Abrams was heavy, over 60 tons. But it survived hits that shredded lighter platforms. And when bridges didn't hold, American engineers built new ones. In hours, helicopter reconnaissance and GPS ensured the Abrams always had a path forward. Meanwhile, the Soviets clung to their math. A T-72 burns 1.5 liters kilometers. An Abrams burns nearly 10. But none of that matters when the Abrams fights from standoff range and ends the battle in minutes. By the time a Soviet-style tank column reached the fight, it was already outgunned, outranged, and outflanked. The wrong theory isn't just logistical denial. It's a failure to understand the true speed of modern war. Not speed of vehicles, speed of decision, precision, and first strike. The Abrams didn't need to be everywhere. It only needed to be where it mattered most, first. And when it got there, it didn't run out of gas. It ran out of targets. With logistical arguments falling apart, Soviet analysts switched tactics again. If the Abrams can't be dismissed as slow or fragile, then perhaps it's simply a glass cannon, lethal at range, but vulnerable in close-quarters combat. The new theory: it can shoot, but it can't take a hit. Soviet tank crews had long been trained in the principle of mutual destruction. Get close, fire first, and be ready to die if it means eliminating the enemy. It was brutal, but accepted. After all, the T-72 was cheaper, faster to produce, and could be replaced by the dozens. They believed the Abrams would fold under pressure. They believed wrong. In the early days of Desert Storm, Iraqi Republican Guard units equipped with upgraded T-72s attempt a night ambush near Al-Busayya. The plan? Close the distance and swarm. They fire 125mm shells at close range. They hit, but the Abrams keeps moving. Its Chobham composite armor, reinforced with ceramic layers and classified steel alloys, proves shockingly resistant, even to direct hits from tank rounds. Then comes the shocker. It's not just resisting impact, it's absorbing it. The turret survives hits. The crew is uninjured. Fire suppression activates instantly. Ammo remains secure behind blast-proof panels. Within seconds, the Abrams returns fire and annihilates the attackers. Captured Iraqi officers are stunned. One confesses during interrogation, "We hit it twice, and it kept coming. No tank should survive that." The second wrong theory collapses under steel and fire, because the Abrams isn't just about offense, it's built around crew survivability. Unlike the T-72's autoloader design, which stores shells in the crew compartment, the Abrams separates ammunition with armored blast doors. When a T-72 is hit, the crew often dies instantly as ammo cooks off. When an Abrams is hit, the tank survives. The crew lives. The gun fires back. Worse still for Soviet theorists, the tank isn't alone. U.S. forces fight in combined arms formations. Even if an Abrams is immobilized, it's never truly isolated. Infantry, IFVs, air support, and logistics units swarm to recover or protect it. Soviet-style mob and flank tactics fail because there is no weak link. One battle near Medina Ridge seals the myth's death. Abrams tanks take multiple hits from enemy T-72s, RPGs, and even ATGMs. None are destroyed. Not a single crew is lost. After-action reports show over 300 enemy tanks destroyed in the region, most by Abrams crews engaging beyond visual range. The conclusion is clear. This tank doesn't fold under pressure. It doesn't just dish out death. It endures it. It learns from it. It adapts to it. And by surviving what Soviet designers called kill shots, it exposed the fatal flaw in their own doctrine. Theirs could kill, but only once. The Abrams? It kills again, and again, and again. Within the towering glass corridors of the GRU's Military Technical Intelligence Division, something was broken, and no one wanted to admit it. For over a decade, Soviet analysts had tracked the M1 Abrams through test ranges, arms expos, and satellite photos. They collected engine specifications, armor profiles, and weapon systems. They reviewed training manuals, doctrinal papers, and even captured NATO reports. And yet, when the Abrams entered real combat, none of it added up. The GRU's models predicted performance parity. Their simulations projected Abrams mobility inferior to the T-80, protection similar to the T-72M1, and lethality on par with the 2A-46 gun used on Soviet tanks. Instead, what they witnessed was a catastrophic overmatch and a systemic failure to anticipate it. Here's where they went wrong. 1. Thermal overmatch ignored. Soviet. Analysts viewed thermal imaging as a gimmick, fragile, power-hungry, and vulnerable to dust or rain. They relied on active IR and night vision scopes that barely functioned beyond 1,000 meters. But in the Gulf, Abrams crews identified, ranged, and killed enemies through total visual obscurity. The GRU's technical estimates had completely undervalued the effectiveness of FLIR systems. 2. Fire control underestimated. Soviet tanks were designed for manual finesse. Crews trained to compensate for limited computers, but the Abrams had a digital fire control system that adjusted for wind, target movement, and barrel wear, all in milliseconds. Hit probability at 2,500 plus meters was high even on the move. The Soviets didn't believe that was possible. They were wrong. 3. Depleted uranium shells misjudged. Western penetration estimates for the Abrams 120 MUAS to M829DU rounds were treated as propaganda. Soviet models showed these rounds penetrating about 400 mm of RHA, rolled homogeneous armor. In Iraq, the rounds punched through the frontal glasses of T-72s like wet paper, igniting ammunition and flipping turrets. The GRU's armor survivability models were rendered useless. 4. Abrams armor misidentified. Chobham armor was considered effective, but not revolutionary. GRU simulations suggested it would resist RPGs and older tank shells, but not modern APFSDS rounds. Then came the real-world test. The 125 mm shells from Iraqi T-72s struck Abrams hulls and bounced, shattered, failed to penetrate. Multiple hits, 0 kills. 5. Tactical doctrine misread. The GRU expected the Abrams to function like a conventional MBT, fixed formations, slow turns, single-axis engagements. Instead, U.S. tank units maneuvered like cavalry, independent platoon actions, high-speed flanking, autonomous kill decisions, GPS-guided tactics. It wasn't a tank, it was a hunter-killer platform. In the months following Desert Storm, an internal report labeled Top Secret, Do Not Distribute, reached the Soviet Defense Ministry. It included excerpts like, "The M1A1 cannot be compared to Soviet MBTs in any direct metric. Its engagement range, armor resistance, and command flexibility represent a generational leap." Another line hit harder. No Soviet or Warsaw Pact armored formation would survive a head-on engagement against an M1-equipped unit under current doctrine. This was the admission they had feared. The GRU didn't just fail to predict a new threat. They failed to see a revolution. They looked at tonnage, barrel length, and armor thickness, when they should have looked at data fusion, target acquisition time, and real-world kill performance. They expected a Cold War tank duel. Instead, they got a machine that rewrote the rules mid-battle, and then proved it on live fire video. By the time Soviet intelligence realized their error, it was too late. The Abrams wasn't coming. It was already there. And every model they'd built to stop it belonged to the past. The Soviet Union prepared for tanks. What it got was a system. The M1 Abrams was never just a machine of armor and firepower. It was the centerpiece of an integrated mechanized doctrine that fused technology, tactics, and total visibility into one unstoppable engine of war. Start with the platform itself. The M1A1 weighed over 60 tons, powered by a Honeywell AGT-1500 gas turbine engine delivering 1,500 horsepower. It could go from 0 to 32 km/h in under 7 seconds, despite its weight. It topped out at 72 km/h on roads, but more importantly, it could maintain speed off-road, tearing through open terrain where Soviet tanks would hesitate. Its suspension was fully independent, giving it stability across rocky, shifting sands and allowing accurate fire while moving, a feat most Warsaw packed vehicles never mastered. And then came the eyes. Each Abrams was equipped with FLIR, forward-looking infrared, for the gunner and commander, giving them 24-hour, all-weather targeting capability. Soviet tanks operated with basic IR spotlights, vulnerable to reflection, rain, and dust. Abrams could spot a heat signature through smoke at 3,000 meters. The enemy would never even know it was being watched. Now layer on the brain, the digital fire control system. A suite of computers calculated barrel droop, crosswind, relative motion, target lead, and atmospheric pressure in real time. The result? First shot kills at extreme range, while moving, at night. It wasn't luck. It wasn't training alone. It was engineering and software. The main gun was the Rheinmetall-designed 120mm smoothbore, adopted as the M256. Firing M829 depleted uranium sabots, it could punch through 600mm of RHA-equivalent armor at over 2.5 kilometers. Nothing in the Soviet arsenal could survive that. Not the T-72, not the T-80, not even the most upgraded export versions. And inside, safety came first. The Abrams placed its ammunition in sealed, blowout compartments, a feature the Soviets mocked as redundant, but it saved lives. When a T-72 was hit, its ammo, stored beneath the turret, would ignite. Result? A fireball and a flying turret. When an Abrams was hit, the panel absorbed the blast. The crew survived. But the true power of the Abrams wasn't in its steel. It was in how the U.S. Army used it. Each Abrams unit moved as part of a network. GPS coordination, real-time intelligence from satellites and AWACS, integrated battlefield logistics that ensured fuel and shells were never far behind. It was a kill web, and the Abrams was its fanged edge. When American tankers rolled into battle, they weren't guessing. They knew where the enemy was, how far, and how many. The Soviet model relied on visual ID and radio. The American model used digital overlays and satellite feeds. One veteran summed it up. "We weren't faster, we just knew everything first." While Soviet commanders were still reacting, American crews were firing. While T-72s fumbled for target range, Abrams, gunners had already scored a hit. While Soviet armor was looking for cover, Abrams units had moved again, and flanked. This is why the Abrams didn't just win. It dominated. Not because it was perfect, but because it was invisible until it fired, lethal before it was seen, and unkillable when it was hit. The Soviet Union built tanks. The U.S. built an ecosystem of destruction, with the Abrams as its hammer, and when that hammer dropped, nothing stood. February 26, 1991. The Battle of 73 Easting. The most decisive tank engagement of the Gulf War and the final nail in the coffin of Soviet armored doctrine. A U.S. armored cavalry troop from the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, equipped with M1 Abrams tanks and M3 Bradleys, advances through a blinding sandstorm in western Iraq. Visibility drops to 0. Traditional combat doctrine says, halt. But the Abrams has no need for daylight. Using FLIR sights, GPS coordinates, and laser rangefinders, the American column continues forward. At 4:10 p.m., lead elements crest a ridgeline, easting 73, and spot the impossible, an entire Republican Guard armored division arrayed in defense. T-72s, T-62s, artillery pieces, BMPs, Soviet-made, Soviet-trained, Soviet-positioned. In any other war, this would be a bloodbath, close-range visibility, dozens of tanks, a potential ambush. Instead, it becomes a rout. The Abrams crews lock on. The first salvos hit T-72s at 2,800 meters. Turrets fly. Ammunition cooks off. Entire tank crews vanish in fire. Within moments, the battlefield descends into chaos for Iraq. American tanks remain calm, fluid, deadly. Gunner. Target. Tank. Front. Fire. Loader. Up. Commander. Identified. Fire. Shell. Impact. Kill. Repeat. In just 23 minutes, the Americans destroy over 160 Iraqi armored vehicles. Not one Abrams is destroyed. Only one is disabled. By a mine. The crew survives. Meanwhile, Iraqi crews, blinded by their own tactics, misled by outdated doctrine, die inside burning hulls. Some try to flee. Some reverse into friendly lines. Some simply abandon their vehicles and run. But the Abrams crews don't stop. They press forward. By nightfall, the battlefield is littered with smoldering wreckage. Soviet tanks that once formed the backbone of Warsaw Pact power now lie shattered across the desert floor. And back in Moscow? Humiliation. The T-72 was supposed to be the equalizer. The Republican Guard was supposed to be elite. The American tank was supposed to be too heavy, too complex, too slow. But the evidence is now irrefutable. U.S. losses, 0 tanks to enemy fire, Iraqi armored strength, decimated, engagement duration, under 30 minutes, kill ratio, over 50. For Soviet strategists, this was no longer theoretical. This was a live demonstration of total failure. One GRU observer wrote in his report, "We have just witnessed the death of our doctrine. The enemy saw first, fired first, and was never touched. This is not war, it is slaughter." And the true horror? This wasn't a best-case scenario for the Americans. It was routine, it was rehearsed, it was built into every Abrams unit from the ground up. Every maneuver, every shot, every kill, scripted in doctrine NATO had quietly perfected while the Soviets laughed. The humiliation wasn't just tactical, it was ideological. Their tanks were supposed to survive. Their numbers were supposed to overwhelm. Their tactics were supposed to prevail. But 73 Easting proved a darker truth. When the Abrams arrives, you don't get a second chance. In the wake of the Gulf War, the battlefield silence was deafening, because in that silence, Soviet ideology collapsed. For decades, the Red Army's armored core had been built on core beliefs: quantity defeats quality, mobility beats survivability, mass production outpaces precision engineering, and Soviet tanks, though simple, were good enough to win. The M1 Abrams didn't just challenge these beliefs, it annihilated them. No Soviet tank had ever encountered such a force. In less than 100 hours of ground combat, U.S. Abrams tanks destroyed thousands of Iraqi armored vehicles, many of them Soviet T-72s and T-62s, without losing a single one to tank fire. This wasn't war. It was a live-fire exercise, with the enemy in the way. Soviet military theorists scrambled to rewrite assessments. Entire doctrinal manuals, centered on frontal breakthroughs and tank waves, had to be shelved. Field studies from the Gulf War were classified. The performance of the Abrams became a taboo subject within some Soviet academies. One leaked internal memo from the Frunze Military Academy read, "No known Soviet platform can consistently engage and defeat the Abrams at combat-effective ranges. Tactical adaptation is insufficient. Strategic redesign is required." But strategic redesign wasn't an option. By early 1991, the Soviet Union was buckling under economic collapse, political fragmentation, and the unraveling of the Warsaw Pact. Entire regions were seeking independence. Military modernization was frozen. Resources were drying up. The truth had become clear. They had lost the tank race, and the Cold War had no reset button. While they built tanks for a 1940s-style blitzkrieg, the Americans built machines for the next century. Where Soviet systems relied on close-in slugfests, the Abrams fired from invisible standoff ranges. Where Soviet tanks gambled on fast kills, the Abrams ensured no gamble was necessary. The psychological blow was immense. For 40 years, Soviet commanders believed they could challenge the West tank for tank, soldier for soldier. But the Abrams shattered that illusion. It proved that American technological supremacy wasn't abstract. It was operational. It wasn't about flashy gadgets or big budgets. It was about who saw first, who fired first, who lived after. The Abrams lived. Every Soviet-built tank it faced didn't. And in that grim arithmetic, the Red Army realized the unthinkable. They weren't ready. They never had been. And now they never would be. Today, the M1 Abrams still rolls across the battlefields of the 21st century. Its design has evolved. New armor composites, active protection systems, upgraded electronics. But the soul remains unchanged. The Abrams isn't just a tank, it's a symbol of what happens when you don't play by old rules. Decades after the Cold War ended, Soviet descendants, modern Russian tank designers, are still trying to close the gap. The T-90, the Armata, platforms touted as revolutionary. But the comparisons continue, and the echoes won't stop. Because every time one of them is exported, one question follows. But how would it do against an Abrams? The myth of invincibility now belongs to the West. Not because the Abrams never had flaws, it did. Not because it could never be defeated, it can. But because, when it was finally unleashed in war, it did what no Soviet general believed possible. It dominated every battlefield it entered. It destroyed every tank it faced. And it never flinched. In museums across the world, burned-out T-72s sit like fossilized relics, rusted, hollow, their turrets dislocated, their paint scorched. They are reminders not just of the Gulf War, but of a deeper truth. The Cold War wasn't won in theory. It was won in practice. The Abrams didn't win because of propaganda. It won because when the time came, it was ready, and its enemies were not. That readiness still echoes in U.S. doctrine, still defines American armor units, still terrifies adversaries who remember what happened when Soviet doctrine met American innovation at high velocity. It was never about just one tank. It was about what the West had become, when the pressure finally hit, and what the Soviets had feared most, that the Abrams wouldn't just survive the war, it would survive them.